But first, Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States, much to the disgust of many journalists who tried everything in their power to convince Americans not to vote for him. And many of those arguments were simply lies, like the lie 1 week out from the election that he was violently advocating for a critic of his, Liz Cheney, to be shot by a firing squad.
4 days out from Election Day, and former President Donald Trump is escalating his violent rhetoric, suggesting one of his most prominent critics, the former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, should be fired upon.
And that take shot around the world.
Donald Trump has been accused of using dangerous rhetoric after suggesting guns should be trained on the face of Republican critic Liz Cheney. The presidential candidate is now being investigated over whether he's violated death threat laws just days out from the election.
It even fooled our taxpayer-funded media.
Donald Trump's comments about a prominent Republican critic have caused some outrage. Just tell us about those comments.
Joe, this has really overshadowed Donald Trump's Rust Belt push. He made comments with right-wing TV host Tucker Carlson about Liz Cheney, a former Republican congresswoman, but an outspoken critic of Donald Trump. And certainly there's no love lost between the two. But Donald Trump certainly took that acrimony a step further in that interview with Tucker Carlson, describing her as a very dumb person, a war hawk, and even raising the hypothetical, I guess, of her facing a firing squad.
So did Donald Trump call for a political adversary to face a firing squad? Well, according to Snopes, he did not. Despite violent rhetoric, Trump did not threaten to have Liz Cheney shot. In context, his words did not amount to an explicit threat against Cheney. Now let's listen to what Trump actually said.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy.
As Snopes confirmed, there was no threat to stand her before a firing squad. It was just a complete lie. Trump was making the point that people who advocate for wars or spout expansionist military policies probably would not like to be in a war zone where guns are pointed at them. It is so obviously false that even the ABC here in Australia had to issue its 53rd humiliating correction of the year. They write several news stories across News Radio and Triple J on the 2nd of November reported that US presidential candidate Donald Trump had suggested that former Congresswoman Liz Cheney should be, quote, put before a firing squad or have guns trained on her face and be shot. It added the full context of Trump's remarks, which would have made it clear he was criticising Cheney's alleged willingness to send Americans to war zones rather than advocating violence against her. It is worth pointing out the fake news about calling for a firing squad was published by the ABC all over social media in that clip that we just played for you earlier. And the correction from the ABC was only published after Trump won. And the video we played has not even been taken down. The media ran this lie everywhere in the lead up to the election, and journalists are wondering why people have started ignoring their criticisms of Trump. Well, joining me on the show this week is the Australian's Darren Davidson and the Daily Telegraph's Tim Blair. Tim, let's start with you. That was a rather extraordinary, can we call it journalistic sleight of hand, to truncate these quotes and turn them into something which you know, I know, everybody knows that's not what he was talking about. The problem I have is how it proliferated through the media so easily, how everyone fell for this in the lead up to an election when, by the way, these are the same people talking about misinformation every spare second that they could get an opportunity. And they've misrepresented this and made it seem like he's calling for the death of one of his adversaries.
It is absolutely a form of misinformation, and it reflects as well this incredibly disingenuous habit of the modern press, especially in regard to Donald Trump, to just pretend that there's no such thing as nuance or any kind of shade to it at all. I mean, if Trump had said, you know, inflation is sky high, the media presumably would have run with, Trump literally says that inflation is reaching the limit of the Earth's outer atmosphere. You know, it's been bubbling up in the press for a time, this kind of absurd literalism. I remember maybe 12 years ago we had a fact-checking organisation launched in Australia that one of its first efforts was to disprove a claim by a National Party MP that there were gold-plated coffee machines for the public service. They actually, no, I'm serious, you can look this up. They actually went through various, hardware store or suppliers or kitchen suppliers, couldn't find one that was gold-plated. You know, they busted that thing. And this has been rippling through. I'm not sure if it reflects more a diminution or an erasing of the ability to detect nuance, or if it's just deliberate being dumb. Your call.
I think there is a degree of stupidity there. And Darren, it's not the first time we've seen, Tim, you're 100% right about these literal takes. It wasn't that long ago that they were saying Donald Trump was advocating for a bloodbath. But when you listen to the clip, he's talking about there being an economic bloodbath in manufacturing, and I think it was motor vehicles specifically, motor vehicle manufacturing. He's talking with these, yes, they're inflammatory euphemisms and everything, but he's not advocating for violence in the way that they're trying to purport him to have done. But Darren, on this case, on this specific case, it's a few days out from the election, and you've got every major media outlet publishing a story that one of the candidates wants a political adversary to be shot by firing squad. Kamala Harris actually came out saying this should disqualify him from the race. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's interesting you've actually highlighted this clip, and it's one example of many because it reflects a pattern that we've seen throughout the campaign and throughout the election cycle. And that's where the media at large in the US has played this role of boosting Harris and the Democrats and taking things out of context. And that's played a big role in losing the election for them, because it's kind of created this bubble in which the Democrats are kind of disconnected from the real concerns of voters, whether it's border chaos, inflation, the economy, or crime. And, you know, probably the most famous example would be these continuous assurances that Biden was, as sharp as a tack. And, a good example of things being taken out of context in relation to that was the Group 7 meeting, I think back in June, where you saw Biden in video footage that you played on Sky, wandering aimlessly around. And we were told that he was fine and there was no problem whatsoever. And of course, that we soon learned that that wasn't the case, which we all suspected. But yeah, it's that example that you've highlighted and many others have created this bubble in which Democrats live, and they've just become completely disconnected from what's really going on in the minds of voters. And we saw that in the election result a couple of days ago.
Yeah, it's the ultimate boy who cried wolf, isn't it? I mean, I believe they called those clips cheap fakes. They couldn't say that they were fake, but they said they were deceptively cut. I don't know what was deceptive about him wandering around. It just is what it is.